It's almost St. Patrick's Day, so it's time we try some of Ireland's native alcoholic spirit. This week we're looking at the Mara Poitín from Blackwater Distillery. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this is the Mara Poitín from the Blackwater Distillery. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now first off, who are the Blackwater Distillery? Well, recently enough I actually reviewed one of their sourced whiskies. I'll put a link to that up there, a link down below, under the Velvet Cap range. That was a whiskey they sourced, but they have been making whiskey for some time under the Blackwater Distillery name. This, however, as you can tell, is not whiskey. This is poitin. Poitin is like Ireland's native, like Ireland's original alcohol spirit. If you kind of squint and look at it like a little bit, you can think of it kind of as an unaged whiskey. Now, it's not an unaged whiskey, it is its own unique category, but it does bear a lot of similarities to an unaged whiskey. But one of the biggest differences to an unaged whiskey is that this has to taste nice by itself. You can't just make something alcoholic, throw it in a cask, and hopefully that cask influence, makes it taste nice at the end. This has to taste nice right off the bat. Peter Mulrine and John Wilcox, the kind of owner and founder and head distiller at Blackwater Distillery, they worked very hard on creating a lot of different mash bills, different kind of recipes to make a lot of alcoholic spirits, including of course whiskey, but also their poitin, and this is no exception. This is a very complex style of whiskey, or style of poitin, sorry. It has a very different type of mash bill. So it has 50% McNamara malt, and I'll come back to that special kind of malt to explain what that is. It has 30% raw barley, 10% Performer Rye, 5% turf malted oats, and 5% husky oats. So there's a little bit of like turfed or peated, so there should be a little bit of smokiness in there. And if you look at it on the surface, that mash bill does look a lot like a traditional pot still whiskey, where there's some malted, some unmalted barley in there, and as well as some other grains. But that McNamara malt is a bit different. So McNamara, for those of you who don't speak Irish, it essentially means like son of the sun. Oh, so to say, son of the sea. So McNamara, son of the sea. It's special because what they've done with this is they actually used a lot of seaweed or kelp in the production of their malted, kind of not malted whiskey, but their malted poitin. When you're malting like the barley to get that alcoholic spirit, you get the barley wet, like you soak it, and then you kind of trick it into growing, so it starts creating these sugars, and then you stop it, you malt it and you dry it out, so you get all those extra sugars, and that gives you a lot of extra, sugar, so you can make the alcoholic spirit. For this here, when they were soaking that barley, they soaked it in beds, like watery beds that were filled with kelp or seaweed, so you get a lot of that kind of sea influence, that kind of salty, briny influence right into the barley. And then when they were malting it, when they were drying it, they laid it out on beds again with seaweed. So they used that seaweed right through the malting process to kind of get that sea, the iodine, the kind of that classic sea influence right through into the final spirit, into the bottle. Now, I was talking to Peter Mulrine at Poitín Now, a kind of a little festival for Irish spirits like poitins, and he was saying that this was one of the hardest projects they ever worked on, because he had to get someone to hand collect like several hundred kilos of seaweed, which then turned into much smaller weight of seaweed because it dried out. So he had to get someone to actually collect by hand so much of that seaweed. It was one of the most expensive, or at least time-consuming projects they ever made, as well as that special kind of production process. And so that's why it's only a small 200ml bottle. It's only a small batch. I did check their website before I started this review. It is still available for sale, so if you do like the sound of the end of it, you can get it, but I'm not sure they'll be making it again, or if they do make it again, it'll likely be again in small batches and small bottles, just like that. But the proof of the kind of work is, of course, in the glass, it's in the bottle. It's how does it taste? How did that sea influence come through? So let's go in for the nose. Cheers. Okay, right off the bat, if you ever have tasted a poitin, you'll know it has this kind of like I don't want to say grassy, but that kind of earthy note to it, and this definitely has that. This does come in at 50% alcohol by volume, so it does have a nice amount of weight in there, and it has this kind of earthy note to it. That's the kind of the baseline. Has like, it's quite sweet. It's quite like that kind of the sweet hay, that grass, that kind of note, that kind of earthiness to it. But then you've got a big like sea influence. Like I'm imagining myself like almost on a field beside the sea. Like you get that fresh cut grass, you get that salty influence in the air, that kind of not iodine, that, yeah, that kind of iodine, that kind of thing. You get that bit of minerality. There's a little bit of smoke, like it's not a huge amount, like only 5% of the mash bill was like turfed or peated, so you're only going to get a small amount of smoke coming through, but it is there. You can definitely smell it coming through. There's also a fair bit of like fruitiness coming through on this. I mean, like a kiwi or like a pineapple, those kind of like bright, sharp, kind of not sharp, but like very bright, like shiny fruits, almost metallic in nature, but like not harsh, like that kind of, yeah, like that sharpness but not harshness in there. Like, yeah, that kind of bright fruit is coming through as well. There's also a bit of like spiciness, like the rye coming through it. 10% of it I think was, yeah, 10% of it was rye, so you're going to get that again, that like black tea, eucalyptus, but also that spiciness, that kind of distinctive rye spiciness coming through. It almost actually, just as I'm thinking about that rye, as I'm going into that rye note, it smelled a little bit like rye bread, but not like a baked rye bread. Like if you get the rye bread dough, like that kind of, you know, it's floury, it's that earthiness. It hasn't been cooked up, so it's not yet super sweet. It just has all that spicy rye flavor. I did say that it was coming in at 50% ABV, and there's none of that really on the nose. Like you can tell it's not down at 40%. You can tell it's not low, but it's not harsh. It's not like burning my nose. So let's go in for the palate and see if it is as balanced. Cheers. I know I said on the nose it wasn't super sweet, like that bready note wasn't heavily sweet. Palate, it's almost pure sugar. It is so sweet, like naturally sweet on the palate. Like I do get that ABV tingle. There's a bit of that kind of like alcoholic note there on the palate, definitely. You can only feel that there's a nice hit of alcohol through it, but so sweet. Little touch of smoke, but really strong with that kind of seaweed influence. Like I know like seaweed might not sound like the most appetizing kind of note. It might not sound like the thing you want to taste, but it's like an influence. It doesn't taste, yeah, it's like an influence. It doesn't taste like I'm eating the seaweed, like I've got the seaweed in my mouth and I'm chewing it. It tastes like something that's like been influenced by the seaweed. Like has a little bit of that like minerality again, the saltiness, the brininess, and that kind of like, again, almost like earthy metallic kind of note I was talking about in the nose. That's coming through in the palate, but in a nicer way than it initially might sound when you think of like seaweed and whiskey. So I'm going to go in, or seaweed, sorry, and poitin. So I'm going to go in again for another sip and see how it goes. Okay, I let that one sit on my palate a little bit longer just so I can get all that flavor through it, and it's definitely on the sweeter side. It's definitely got that like 50% of it is malted barley, so you're going to get that sweetness coming through. The other ingredients like the unmalted barley, the oats, the rye, they're not going to give you a huge amount of sweetness, but there is that natural sweetness here. Like I said, it's almost like pure sugar, but like pure sugar, not like that super refined stuff you'll get like it comes in a bag. Like it tastes like natural sugar, like really sweet, like when you bite into a fruit and you get all that sweet natural sugar, that kind of sweetness coming through. The kind of kiwi pineapple note I was getting kind of on the nose, that's not really coming through into the palate. That's more kind of gone to the background with that kind of sharp sweetness. It's more leading in with that seaweed influence, again, as you kind of expect with something called like the son of the sea, Mac Namara. So I'm going to go in for another sip, but focus on the finish. Cheers. Okay, so on the finish, like up front again, you get all that sweetness, you get that transition to the kind of earthy, spicy note to it. The finish it's light. I mean, it hasn't spent any time in a barrel, so it's not going to pick up any of those oak tannins or anything like that. It's clean though. Like it is, it's if you think of like vodkas, people say the vodkas, you take a sip of it and it's supposed to be clean, it's supposed to be quite a defined finish. That's kind of where this is. There's still though that bit of peaty smoke, that bit of that seaweed minerality, that's still there. So The alcohol, like that 50% alcohol, that's gone. Little tiny tingle on my tongue, but nothing huge. It doesn't feel like I've drunk something super high proof and I'm gonna have a headache later on. Just nice and clean with those kind of seaweed, malty, and a little touch of that smoke note lingering on into the finish. If you've ever had any poitins, whether from Blackwater Distillery or any other distillery, let me know down in the comments below, because it's definitely one of those like spirits that is overlooked. Like, it is Ireland's kind of native spirit. It's very fun to make, I think, from distilleries. They can play around with the mash bill. There's not as much rules for making poitin as there is for making whiskey, so you can kind of play around with it and do something different, and this here is definitely different. If you have tried whiskies, if you've tried poitins and you're looking for something very different, this is going to be it. It is, don't get me wrong, this is a lovely little poitin, but with that amount of seaweed kind of influence to it, I would not say this is a typical poitin. If you're looking for something that is a typical straight down the middle poitin, something from somewhere like the Bowan Distillery or the Culloden Distillery or the Wheelock Distillery, those are making some really nice poitins that are kind of straight down the middle, like what a poitin or a classic kind of poitin is. This is definitely, yes, it is a classic poitin, but it's different. It's very different. I really do like it. As you can tell, this bottle is nearing its end because I've enjoyed it so much, because it's just very different. If you like, I think it's only €25 on the Blackwater website, so if you like the sound of it and you like it, give it a try. It's not hard to go wrong for €25 for something that's so experimental and so different. But if you are just looking to explore poitin for the first time, this probably wouldn't be where I'd recommend you start. I'd start with one of those other more kind of classic general styles of poitin before experimenting with something a bit more different. But that's all I have to say about this. I put out whiskey reviews and poitin reviews every Wednesday. I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday, and I put out other videos every now and then on Monday. So if you want to see more, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time. Sláinte.